Good afternoon, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be here today. My name is Christian Harrison, and I'm a reader in leadership in the University of the West of Scotland, and I'm also privileged to be facilitating the research seminar series of the School of Business and Creative Industries. We've had this series for over a year now, and we've had a lot of very fascinating presentations, and thanks everyone for coming. And today is not going to be anything less because we have an expert in the house, Dr. Ian Stewart, that will be telling us much more. But don't worry, we'll not talk about Ian yet. We'll still give Ian some time before.
No, he's going to do a lot of that later.
Before we start, but Ian is going to tell so much about himself. But it's great to have everybody here today. And I always say, please feel free to introduce yourself via the chat. I know it's a very busy time at the end of the year, so a lot of people are busy. So thanks for coming. But feel free to introduce yourself via the chat. Let's know where you're coming from. Feel free also to put your cameras on. So don't stay in the digital shadow. So there is no reason to put the cameras on. But of course, if you think you also need to do that, we also respect that. So you don't need to put it on if you don't want to as well. But like the rules of Zoom, it's important that you mute yourself while you're not talking. So if you're not talking, please feel free to mute yourself. But apart from that, unfortunately, either way, it's an online session, but we don't have cake and drinks. So you have coffee, but of course, you can get that from where you are. And if for any reason there is an emergency in your house or your life is much more important, so please, you can leave the system and go and address one or two things you need to address today. By the way, it's great to have everybody here today. And of course, we have a speaker in the house, is Ian. And I'm so grateful to have Ian here today. When I reached out to Ian and told Ian to come and do this for us, he said he was going to do it. Ian, at the moment, he's on sabbatical, so he's not meant to be doing anything of this nature. But Ian is really spending the time that he should be resting in doing this. So we really appreciate you, Ian, for,
very kind of you,
for doing this for us today. And of course, like I've said, Ian is going to talk about what we're going to talk about really. And at the end, you will have time to ask Ian some questions. But today we'll be looking at, as Debbie Harry said, a man's got to know his limitations. Very catchy title. And Ian's going to be telling us so much about it. But it shapes from autoethnography. For a lot of us, this might be something new, but it's a research approach that seeks to describe and analyze personal experience in order to understand cultural experience as well. So Ian will be drawing from that, basically from his own teaching of Postexperienced students over almost 20 years. But first, let me introduce Ian to you. Although Ian was talking so much about himself that I don't think I can cover that in a few minutes. But Dr. Ian Stewart is a reader in project management, education, and program manager of the MSc in the management of projects in the University of Manchester. So Ian Stewart is from Manchester. That's where he is based at the moment. Additionally, he lectures in commercial management of projects and management of projects. And the first subject he first brought him to the school was in 2001 through teaching on the bespoke BT MSc in commercial management. He has a PhD in this area, so that's great. It was a combination of historical research into the descent of commercial managers into project-led organizations such as BT, RL, BAE, and their practice of innovation within the commercial role in those firms. For this, he claims the distinction of holding the last UMSIT PhD, so he has that in his repertoire as well. The history of British industrial management from 1850, particularly the social mobility, practical integration, and the resistance of schools of engineering to commercial and management education remains a special research interest. So from the disenchantment with the IT industry, so he moved away from IT, the very nice IT industry, before he moved to academia. Ian has been falling towards academia, and along the way, he has developed extensive interdisciplinary experience, contextualizing business and management education for engineering, projects, and high technology context. Ian holds various visiting lectureships at different parts of the world, at École de Guinness, de La Rochelle, WMG, University of Warwick and Manchester Business School, and is also a fellow of the Higher Education Academy. So this is just a snapshot of the experts we have in the house, and that's Ian Stewart. He's also a very active member of the British Academy of Management, and he's also a very strong advocate of post-experience education as well, that you'll be talking about today. So thank you so much, Ian, and the floor is yours.
Thank you for that introduction, Christian, and thank you everybody else for being here this afternoon. It's good to see you here. I'm sure I'm about to talk about myself for a long time, and this kind of goes against the grain for me as a person, but it is the nature of autoethnography, as hopefully you'll appreciate by the end of this talk. So let me just share my screen with you. So, as Dirty Harry said, a man's got to know his limitations. This was the thought that occurred to me as I was trudging, lonely and dispirited along a cold London street, back to my hotel after 3 days of misery with a GMBA group. I just experienced the most embarrassing failure of my career. My throat was burned, my feet hurt, every step my body ached, and I was tired. I'm sure you've experienced the kind of tiredness that comes when you've been working for something toward a deadline, you've been working right up to the last minute, and you've been barely sleeping, and you've been working to deliver, and then you deliver, and it goes well, yeah? And you get that feeling of relief and release, and it balances off the fatigue. Well, I had no feeling of relief. I just had fatigue, and it was getting worse with every step I took, because I was thinking to myself, what did I do wrong? Where did it go wrong? Is it me? Is it them? You know, maybe I'm no good at this post-experience teaching. Maybe the success I thought I had in the past that told me I was, maybe that was just in my imagination. Maybe it never really happened. And like a lot of British people, when faced with very dark moments, I reached out to humour. And I thought to myself, it's just like that Clint Eastwood film. A man's got to know his limitations. I had met my limitations, and it hurt. Now, of course, a woman has to know her limitations too, and people have to know their limitations. I think this is quite a healthy mental behaviour. You know, I don't know if you've noticed, but very much in our culture, people are told to follow their dreams. But what happens when that dream hits a reality that doesn't care about the dream? Maybe it's better for people to start off by being aware of their limitations as a foundation. If we're aware of our limitations, if we're aware of possibly how we are getting in our own way, then we have an agenda for change and improvement, and then maybe we can achieve those dreams. So that was my situation in 2014. But that's not what led me to immediately do autoethnography. After that situation, I did stop and think carefully and critically about what I'd done, and I put together a plan to deal with it. And it took me about 6 years to get over it. In 2020, I faced another post-experience class, and that one worked out very differently. So what I can say is I have a life in post-experience education. I've had 20 years experience, and most of it has been good. However, there has been this big standout failure. And I discovered my limitations at high financial and emotional cost. And if I'm honest with you, I'm still a little bit haunted by it, you know? And I think to myself, was it them or was it me? And that's like the research question that runs through the work. I returned to this, though, in 2021 because the British Academy of Management Knowledge and Education group was running a conference on post-experience education, the education of people who go to work and then come back to university later. And I wanted to participate in it. And I was kind of thinking, well, what could I do? What could I offer? And that's when this occurred to me, my memory of this. And I thought, would it be useful to compare success and failure that I've experienced to try and learn more about what is the nature of success and failure in this game, and what really contributed to my failure? What were my limitations? And I actually, by going and using the autoethnographic process, I actually made some new insights that I didn't have before. And that's some of the things I'd like to share with you now. As this is a research seminar series, I'm going to talk about the methodology as much as the outcomes from it. So what is autoethnography? It's a subset of ethnography, unsurprisingly. Ethnographic research observes human behavior in its natural setting, and Ellis et al. Define autoethnography as an approach that seeks to describe and systematically analyse personal experience in order to understand cultural experience. So it takes individuals as a case of one and compares or tries to extract from one's experience out to a bigger experience in the world that's of interest. But the thing I like about Ellis's definition is it's got another part to it. It talks about readers. There's two parties in an autoethnography. There's the author that writes it, but if they do their job well, then there is the reader, and the reader can enter that author's world and use what they learned there to reflect on, understand, and cope with their own lives. So an autoethnographer makes their life a data source and creates an account of that life that can be useful to some extent to someone. And that was my intention in doing this. So what can it be useful for? Well, lots of different things. Writing about the self in exchange with others is very useful in management and education research, which I sit at the crossroads of. Nothing in the area of management or education is achieved alone. It is always someone exchanging with someone else. So an autoethnographic inquiry can be initiated by the self, yourself experiencing a phenomenon and looking for causes of it, that eternal question of why does this keep happening to me? That's a classic one. We identify behaviors that we perform, observe, or create. And what do these tell us about our identity and our own role in our experience, helpful and unhelpful? Sometimes we get in our own way. Also, it's useful for researching the experience of others who have an experience that we're interested in. It's based on an understanding of an event or a phenomena from their point of view. So this could be, for example, in the use of management tools. Right now, I'm working on an autoethnography of the use of KJ technique. And what I found by looking at the actual lived experience of people that are using this technique, well, what we found is there's a very different set of instructions compared to the official instructions that you pick up off the internet for this technique. And other things, other experiences of interest, like experiences of services, experiences of policies like diversity and inclusion, or work routines like induction or discipline, anything where finding out what someone is experiencing of a thing is useful. And recommendations or outcomes from that kind of research obviously are very well grounded and are very good for organizations. There are two main traditions in autoethnography, what we call analytic autoethnography, which is where I place myself, that is compatible with traditional ethnographic practice. The work here is analytic in that I am developing a theoretical understanding of a broader social phenomena that I hope will be useful. So by analysing it, I hope to find things that are useful to myself and other people. But there is another, what we call evocative autoethnography, that has a postmodern sensibility that's distanced from realist or analytic traditions. It tries to create compelling descriptions of subjective experience with emotional resonance. And the forms these can take can be quite unconventional. They can be delivered as poetry or as mixed media art installations. And they're not there to be analysed. They simply exist, almost like art. They just exist. And the reader takes to it or takes from it what they will. There are criticisms of autoethnography because, of course, it is radically subjective. So it could be accused of being nothing but top-of-the-head memories. It could be self-indulgent, narcissistic, introspective, totally subjective and non-generalizable victim art. And that victim art accusation, well, there might be something in that, maybe. Some of these accounts do have a slightly negative tone to them. But then, of course, in life, isn't it true that maybe we don't notice or think about our life until things go wrong or until there is a breakdown, and that then stimulates us to think. So unsurprisingly then, many autoethnographies that I've read do have a slightly negative starting point, then there is a problem that is of interest. Criticisms like the above, though, can be countered. For example, making sure that the accounts that are created have coherence and verisimilitude to build the convincing I in the mind of the reader. And really, it's the reader who judges that the truth and the usefulness of the story, at least in analytical autoethnography. By being coherent and truthful, hopefully people like yourself, fellow experts in the field of education or in management, will look at the story and think, oh yeah, this is right. He or she knows what they're talking about. They've been there. Also, the stories must be interesting, having resonance and utility for the benefit of colleagues and organizations. Bochner puts two important questions out. How useful is the story, and to what uses might the story be put? This again focuses on the usefulness of doing this kind of inquiry and producing the kind of outputs that it creates. But even if we are coherent and truthful and interesting, is truth really possible? Even if we create an account of ourselves that we know we're not lying, and we have that feeling in our heart that yes, we've been truthful, is it the whole truth? Because this stuff is historical. I mean, how many of us here in the audience remember the first thing that I said when I began? And that was only 5 minutes ago. So, as Best says, inevitably, more is forgotten than is remembered. Also, remember, I'm dealing with failure. And failure is amongst the most powerful events a person can experience. And psychologists are divided. Does a memory of failure, is it tuned out and down by our minds to protect our ego? Or does it dominate our mind because it's just such a shocking thing? However, even if the outcomes of this study are totally unreplicable and only 85% true, still, these accounts could be viewed as parables in which a person could reflect on them and ask themselves how they might have handled things differently. So they could still be useful. What's the methodology I used? Well, the methodology comes from one of the classic texts in the field, which is this one, Chang 2016, Autoethnography as Method. And she puts forward 10 strategies, which I will use, not necessarily in the order they're presented, to structure some of my presentation for you. But what she doesn't have in her 10 steps is really the first step, which is to create the historical story or account or world, as they're referred to. So for this, I use something called empathy mapping technique, which is derived from the agile project management techniques. And this is a tool to try and understand what stakeholders are doing and thinking and feeling and how they're behaving. It just puts the mind onto the other. So it can help to systematically recreate or to extract from my memory my experience as a teacher and what I observed of the student and what I think they're thinking. Now, I'm helped to some extent in terms of understanding what they're thinking by the theories that I choose as an underpinning. I'll come back to that in a minute. I have some advantages in this kind of a game because I have a semi-autobiographical memory. Amongst my family and friends, I'm considered to be the last word when it comes to a debate about who did what, who said what, when did something happen, who was in the room. The problem with this is I have one foot in the past almost permanently. And that can create some problems when it comes to thinking about the future and from moving on and accepting change. And it was a challenge to separate out classes that I performed repeatedly over several years to try and find a specific moment. But I was helped in that I never delete anything. So I had lots of old schedules, old emails and coursework briefs to help me pinpoint the points in time that I was going to talk about and build my stories about. This is the empathy mapping technique. So these are the questions used. And you can see that by answering these questions or by finding information to match against them, you can see that they help place me in the space that I occupied, looking at the students, trying to recreate what they see, and then to help me unpack that image for the readers. Also, this relates to methodology point 6, which is to analyze relationships between the self and the others. This tool really creates both sets of information about the self and the others. And then I can theorize or analyze the discussion, the interaction, the exchanges between the two. Although social science constructs and theories come at the end of Chang's 10 strategies, I like to do it at the start. So these are my theoretical underpinnings for my inquiry. Pragmatic praxeology. So this is a theory of human action derived from the neo-Austrian economics. And basically it holds that the actions that are observable about people are a result of their concerns. If you combine that with pragmatism, it's concerns for control over their lived experience. That control seems to be defective in some way. They're not getting quite what they want, so they act. And they act to ameliorate that concern and improve their control. Also, I am concerned with identity. So I believe identity is a continually accomplished project that requires social interaction. It's not an achievement. It takes two people to have a valid identity, one to claim it, and then another to be able to then validate that identity through their actions. That requires an exchange between people. Now, in my case, in post-experienced education, that's an exchange between myself as a teacher and the post-experienced student. This leads me then to social exchange theory. In social exchange theory, there is a mutual assessment of both sides, of the identity of both sides before any exchange. Both sides need to know that the other side has the stuff. And then the exchange will be costly. That cost must be balanced in gains. And the gains that are sought by post-experienced students relate to the motivating concerns that lead them to seek post-experience education. So with this framework in mind, and then the information or the data that I'd created using empathy mapping, I then created my 4 stories, my 4 points in time of interest. I haven't got time to share all of them with you, but I'm going to share 2 with you, if that's okay. And then just talk about the other 2. So I'm actually going to read out to you my autoethnographic account. The first one begins right at the beginning of my life as a lecturer of post-experienced students. I was the boy with all the answers. I was teaching IT management in 2001 at a post-92 engineering school on an evening part-time MSc to engineering managers. And here is my account. I had burned out in the dot-com boom, but was able to find work in universities quite easily, as they were desperate for any lecturers who had experience of the dot-com world to support their new degrees in e-commerce or e-business. In my previous work, I was usually the consultant who was sent out to make the presentations to clients and business groups. Plus, I already had a little contract teaching an IT module to working students taking AAT and CIMA accountancy courses. Therefore, I felt confident in my teaching ability and confident in my domain knowledge. I had accrued experience of over 200 companies, as well as experience of my technologies. I'd inherited a module in information and IT management that was appropriate for the mid-90s, and I updated it for the 21st century. The students were part-time, experienced engineering managers on an evening MSc in logistics and supply chain management. I've been into many companies like theirs and had met, interviewed, and persuaded men like these. I was aware of the age and experience difference. I was also sitting at PGCE, and I often tried out new techniques with them. The students seemed to like that I was trying this. Many of their companies had still not got websites or email. They were tied to their customers by EDI or fax. With my background, I felt like I was Neo from the Matrix. I'd come from the future. It was 7 p.m. at the end of a long working Monday. The students looked tired, some in the shirts they had worn all day, ties loosened. Most had come straight from work and had had no dinner. There was a very faint smell of metal and oil in the warm air. Outside the glass-walled room was darkness, except for streetlight and the passing of cars. The atmosphere in the room was blokey, but convivial, somewhat like an old episode of Top Gear. I could hear the Birmingham accents and talk about their work, supply chains, customers, senior managers, fixing problems. These were the challenges that I was familiar with, and I was eavesdropping on them as I was setting up the projector. There was talk until I called the room to order. The lecture was on information and information systems. was back in the days when the default PowerPoint was royal blue with yellow text. I had 18 slides and my lecture was nice and short. I had the notes in my hand, but as I'd been preparing the lecture out loud in my kitchen for a few nights before, I didn't need them. I was doing a lot of talking and my throat was dry. The room had a raised floor, so my footsteps were amplified as I walked up and down the front of the room, the projector light playing into my eyes as I maintained eye contact with my audience, who sat silently making notes. I had to have one eye on the floor. One had to be careful of the power socket hatches. They never seemed to go down flat and they were a trip hazard. They were watching a man much younger than them with far less practical engineering experience, who is as tired as they are, but is up on his feet and speaking enthusiastically about things they had little prior knowledge of. I started with the basics of information as a thing and moved smoothly into systems to generate, manipulate, and store information. Everything went as planned, apart from the sore throat. At one point, I heard something to the effect of, "That's not how we do things here." I could almost imagine that ending with "son." I sometimes heard that when I was a consultant. I'm always prepared to stop and ask them, well, okay, how do you do things where you are? I knew I was in control of the room as there was silence until I always asked the question. It was in the days before there were devices to be played with. After the main talk, I introduced a system mapping exercise as a basis for innovation when implementing an information system. They joined in and produced a different range of interpretations of the case scenario and were all fully engaged in debating what could be done to improve the system and how this activity might apply to their workplaces. They also caught a mistake I'd purposely put into the scenario. They thought they got me, but I had got them. It was over in a tight hour. I was already thinking about my train home and running the gauntlet of the twilight zone, waiting for regeneration between where I was working and New Street Station. So that was story one, a story that I think was a moment of success for me. It was my first job teaching after being a consultant, my first class. I was nervous, but I think it worked out. I walked out of there alive. That to me was a win. Now the second world. I'm going to spend a bit, before I get to that, sorry, this is also a thing I did for each of the worlds. I created a model trying to map out my antecedent concerns and my motivations on one side, and then the students on their side, using a mixture of the theory and also my knowledge of the students and what was going on in the world at that time, and then the space where we met. And it's in this interaction of the two sides that I begin to theorize the nature of the exchange between us and why this was successful or not. Now the second world. So the second world, their biggest fan. Here, I was teaching organizational behavior in 2006 at a Russell Group engineering school on a 3-day intensive MSc on a bespoke MSc in commercial management. This was written specifically for British Telecom. And I was invited by my PhD supervisor to deliver the sessions on organizational behavior. My PhD was in the area of commercial management. So this is the kind of work that's done in projects on the buy side and the sell side in big project-led organizations. And the classroom were complete practitioners, all of them. Obviously, I could tell them nothing about commercial management, but I was very interested in what they were doing and what they were talking about because my PhD was in their area. So I got theoretical and journal-based understanding of their work, but now I was actually hearing the workers themselves talk about what they were doing. And I was really interested in that. And I was an eager ear for all of their anecdotes. And I found over time, I was able to start to use their terminologies and their acronyms in what I was doing. And they were doing the application for me. And I just had to keep listening. And why I felt this was successful in the end was not only did I survive, but I also found I was able to reorient my PhD in some very useful ways. And I turned them into participants in my research, which was a thing I really needed at that time. Now, you might be wondering what this picture's about. Well, one of the things I noticed in the classroom was that there was a lot of very expensive luggage in the room. These were clearly people that were very senior, very well rewarded for what they did, and spent a lot of time traveling globally for British Telecom. And it was just a thing I noticed in the room. Now, my third story. This is the failure. This is where I am the disappointing supplier. I'm teaching IT management in 2014 at a for-profit global business school on a 3-day MBA unit to various London and Europe-based senior managers. And this is one of the stories I'm going to read for you, okay? I had been recruited to take some work at a global for-profit education institution. I've been teaching commercial or procurement on a project management module on their MSc and MPhil programs. And in 2012, I'd been the third highest rated lecturer in their global faculty. It was incredibly well-paid work. It was the most I'd ever made per day. And if I'm honest, I was mostly doing it for the money. It was an unusual place. Everyone was quite friendly and seemed to be a dean or a registrar. In 2014, the dean of the campus offered me some teaching on their EMBA, teaching IT management. This had been my main teaching area 10 years previously. And though I had not taught it in 5 years, I was pretty sure my basic approach was fine. Theories did not change as quickly as technologies did. I took the module specification, the intended learning outcomes, and the cases that they wanted to be used, and put together a new program. It was a chance for me to update my knowledge, which I'd been meaning to do for a while. My .com days were definitely in the rearview mirror. I decided to use the indicated cases in the summative report, as they were 5 to 10 years old and did not relate to the kind of technologies I was going to be presenting in the 3 days or the managerial processes. I'd been teaching for 1 day. It had started fairly well. The students had been attentive and entered into the breakout work very well, analysing a famous annual report for technology trends. There was a little keyboard clatter, but I decided to take the dean's words seriously, that these were big, serious people with big, serious jobs, and so should be allowed to keep their laptops open and take calls if they needed to. Normally, I would not allow this in my room. A student mentioned, "Did you notice how quiet they were when you talked about X? And then when you started talking about Y, the keyboard noise went up." That was apparently an easy indicator of how well I was doing. The room was full and hot. It was shallow and wide, which made it difficult to maintain eye contact with the whole group. There were about 60 students, all with laptops plugged in. Outside the Georgian windows was a main London street. I was on the 2nd floor. When looking out of the windows at the back of the room, the rooftops of red buses drifted by. I delivered the unit guide ILOs, introducing the management issues and then the technologies by groups. However, it seemed as I went on that the keyboard noise was getting louder and louder and louder. Many seemed to have disengaged, and I couldn't get eye contact with any of them. The same 1 or 2 were putting up their hands and participating, but the majority were not. And the clattering. Students could see each other disengage and work on work matters. What was wrong? What had I done? Perhaps they were sending messages to each other about me. They could see I had lost control of the room. I had a mounting sense of panic. There was still a whole 2 days to go of this. I abandoned the lesson plan that night and redrew it to go with the interests of those in the room who were paying attention. Going back to my hotel on the final night, I knew it had not gone well. I was just relieved that it was over, but there was no satisfying tiredness of energy well spent, just empty tiredness. My feet and back hurt. When the dean phoned me the next day, the call was no surprise. Clearly, complaints had moved quickly. He called the class after every session, apparently. There were few specifics on what I had done wrong. It seems like I'd struck the wrong note with them, and a vocal number had felt like they gained nothing by being there. There was apparently a lack of director-level knowledge, even though neither the module specification nor the ILOs mentioned this as a requirement. The dean said, "Sorry, I didn't onboard you properly. That's on me." Apparently, this group was easy to annoy. My contract was cancelled at that point. I still had to mark the summative assessment, though. It was very poor. Few used any peer-reviewed literature, none referenced correctly. There was no use of theory, nor tie back to the literature content, even though the assignment brief gave plenty of direction where to do this. None seemed to know what an academic report was. One thought that submitting a PowerPoint presentation was a report. One submitted an 80% plagiarized report, and when challenged, furiously claimed it was because I was so bad at my job that it made him do it. Pressure was put on me not to fail them, which anyway was going to be difficult on a 4-grade system, A to D. When the dean gave me the bad news, I was in my car. I drove home and things came back to my memory that I hadn't noticed at the time. The dean told me at length how elite they were, that I should be pushing them. But what did that really mean? I thought I did it in my lecture content and they didn't like it. At several points in the 3 days, other administrative and academic managers would come in and tell them how great they were. I cheekily thought, if they were so hot, why are they here and not at INSEAD or HEC Paris? When I spoke to one student about his dissertation, he said, I don't care about the dissertation. I don't need this course. I'm just here for the contacts. I thought, then why not just get a LinkedIn? One wanted to be let off early because she had tickets for the opera and got annoyed with me when I questioned this. The times that they were attentive were when they were talking amongst themselves about what they'd done in their European companies I'd never heard of, or I was telling them something they wanted to know specifically, such as the bullwhip effect in supply chain management. I regretted letting them use their laptops and not disciplining the room. I had let go of control. The problem was, if they got bored, they got into something else. And then when they tried to rejoin the lecture, they would not understand what was now being talked about, which made them feel worse. Changing my teaching plan to focus on the matters of those students that were still with me probably alienated the majority of the class. I wondered what had they been used to up till now that made what I was offering fail to meet their expectation. I recalled the way I was given the case studies like they were gold, even though I thought they were too old. I should have noticed when some pushed back on my critical position early on. I was using a famous paper critical of the sustainability of IT-based competitive advantage. They were resistant to the idea of theory or critique. But what exactly were they here for then? Had I tried too hard to make it leading edge? Why did I not use my senior IT contacts to enrich the program and give them that board level view, if that was what they wanted, but was not in the ILOs or spec? I was annoyed at myself for letting go of control in the room. I felt guilty for good participants. I felt somewhat resentful to the dean who let me walk into it without knowing what the student expectation was, but I also felt guilty that he might feel that he'd misplaced his trust in me. The EMBA cohort seemed so important to him. How could I have read the room so wrong? I thought about the other visiting professors that seemed popular there. They all seemed like jolly older stockbroker types with slightly dodgy attitudes towards women, but they had lots of stories and clear association with big money and the levels of organisation that resides at. It occurred to me that perhaps I should have just built the classes around the case studies, given them a programme suitable for 2005, and let them talk at length about themselves and their opinions, and not try to teach them anything new. To modify Epictetus, it's impossible to teach a man what he thinks he already knows or doesn't want to know. I should have read the room. I should have said less, and then told them how great they were. I also wanted to put the mistake right. I knew what I should have done if that was the opposite of what I did do, but I was never going to get the chance to do that. And now I was doubting myself as a post-experienced teacher for the first time in my academic career. Now, I came back from that. It took a long time, though, in terms of my confidence. And by 2020, I was back in front of post-experienced students again, this time in a very different way, in a different context. Here, I was the listening man. I was teaching commercial management again in a Russell Group Business School on a 3-day intensive MSc workshop to senior NHS workers. This was very, very different. I'd taken over the course from the person that had written the core textbook, and I worked really hard to make sure I extracted every bit of knowledge I needed for them before they left. I also did one or two new things here. I personally contacted each student that was going to come onto the program in my own time. And ostensibly, it was just to say hello. But actually what I was trying to do was understand their motivating concerns. Why were they on this program? What was it they wanted from it? What were they concerned by in this program? I mean, you might think, hang on, commercial management and the NHS. NHS isn't commercial, it's public sector. Well, some of them thought that as well. And these were big, serious people. These were serious NHS administrators, doctors, anaesthetists, big people with life and death in their hands. And they were coming to learn commercial management because the NHS and these people were being challenged to be more commercial and more careful with the money in the decisions they were making and the contracts they were entering into with suppliers to the NHS. And I was surprised that such serious people that did such terrifying things to me every day were so worried about being on this MSc and how they would look and how they would perform with their colleagues watching them, as I learned. So by being able to establish contact with them early and understand what their real concerns were, I was able to address many of these, or all of them, before they came into the room. So when I stepped into that room, it wasn't a room full of strangers. It was a room full of people I'd had contact with. I understood their work. I understood why they were there. I understood what they wanted. And I was already helping them get to those things that they wanted, that amelioration to the concerns they had that put them in the post-experience educational space. And this was successful. It was successful in that I survived, and it was successful in that it had restored my confidence as a post-experience teacher. So then, moving now toward the end game with this analysis. So what we do then, we take the first 3 points of the Chang framework, and what we look for as we compare the stories are basically what is the same and what is different. So I'm looking for variant and invariant situations. And for the variant, particularly looking for what is exceptional, what is different about these. I have 3 successes, 1 failure. So this is what I found regarding variant and invariant regarding the students. So the students were all seeking higher education. From a praxeological perspective, it's an action to ameliorate concerns of personal status, the performance of their role, or they're responding to some kind of business or industry change. Something about their life is telling them they need more education. They could see that their habitual or historical stock of knowledge or practices would be insufficient. They had a lack, and education was the thing that was going to supply that lack by exchanging with me as the teacher. And this education is taken at cost. There are fees involved for themselves or for their companies, but there's also opportunity cost. These are not full-time students. They're fitting education in rather than building a life around it. So something has to give. There's cost elsewhere in their lives. They're taking entrepreneurial responsibility for their own improvement. And they enjoy the exchange of experience, which is noted as fundamental by Hayworth in 1954. I'm going to come back to that. For post-experience education, they enjoyed exchange. The variant in Failure World 3 was the employment backgrounds were very, very diverse, and I didn't know what they were. And their motivating concerns were completely unknown to me, except for 1 or 2 clues that maybe they had some motivations for being there that were not related to education. What about me? What was the same or different about me in these stories? Well, in the stories, I was the one that was delivering the higher education as representative of different kinds of educational institution. I was keen to perform well, and I made efforts to prepare right up to the first lecture, just like I have for this afternoon for you guys. I was concerned to do well for the person who entrusted me, in this case, Christian. And I was taking responsibility for other people's feelings, which was pointed out to me by a colleague at BAM that maybe that's not the most healthy thing for me to do. But there were things that were changing. My motivation was changing. So in story 1, my motivation was a career change and trying to establish myself in a new kind of game. In 2, my motivation was trying to understand this class of manager and get participants for my PhD research. In 3, the motivation was probably the money. And in 4, the motivation was, I think, to try and regain my confidence in post-experience teaching. But I was changing. I was getting older. I looked different to when I was 20-something in 2001. And students responded to me differently. Remember, in social exchange, we identify and assess each other before we've even spoken. And they were identifying me and processing my identity in a very different way in 2001 to as they did in 2020. But the big variant was in Failure World 3. This is the thing that became apparent to me as I compared and analysed the similarities and differences in my stories. And it's this thing I'm going to call the language of experience that's so vital in post-experience education. This is experience of domain knowledge of what I'm presenting and experience of their workplace or the situation they're going to be applying that knowledge in. In both situations, I was weak. I was, to be honest, stretching IT knowledge from the early 2000s. And although I had updated my review, it was the knowledge that had come from careful reading of research, not necessarily the knowledge that had come from having hands on the technology. And I had no language of their workplace, not at all. I didn't know where these people were from. They were from everywhere. So what that meant then was that the signals that signaled to them that their concerns would be met through exchange with me were lacking. And I did not know their motivating concerns for seeking post-experience education. So how could I speak to them? So this idea then about the language of experience that really came home to me. It is a combination of domain knowledge or subject expertise that sounds authentic, sounds like it's coming from first-hand experience, and then experience of student concerns in their work context or other concerns that sound familiar and authentic to them. And we need to have both as post-experienced teachers, I believe. So in The Boy with Answers, I had both. I mean, I had a lot of other defects as well, but at the time, I had both. In Their Biggest Fan and The Listening Man, I had one. I had domain knowledge, but I was signaling that I wanted and was motivated to acquire the other kind of language of experience of their workplace. But in The Disappointing Supplier, I had neither from the point of view of the students. Now, of course, a teacher could have both and yet still not signal it effectively in a way that a student perceives it as part of a teacher's identity. Step 4 in the methodology of Chang is to analyse what is included or omitted. Now, what I included very much in my stories was dialogue with informants beyond the self. I talk about my exchanges with the others in it, because that's what education is. It's social exchange. But what did I omit? Well, one thing I noticed I omitted was any reference to anyone I turn to when things go wrong. I don't do that. Success is what I expect. So when it occurs, it's not noteworthy. And when things go wrong, it's on me. So what's the point of sharing it? I don't believe that is a healthy attitude, really. I could have asked for more help, like my senior IT contacts, but for some reason I didn't. And awareness of my limitations. Yeah, that was something that was omitted. I did not have awareness of my limitations in 3. Frankly, I didn't have it in 1 either, but I could get away with it because I had the language and I was young. And I think looking back, I think a lot of the guys in the room, and they were guys, they were all older men, I think they just kind of tolerated me a bit sometimes. I think they gave me a bit of a pass because I was clearly a much younger person who had something they needed to know. But as I got older, that was gone. As I got older, I became a peer. And so the audience became more critical of me, and rightly so. Step 5 in the methodology is to connect the present with the past. So we try to contextualize the stories in a historical flow. And what we find is that there are several forces in the history of post-experience education that set a path for its practice today and actually show up in my stories. So the concerns of industry, commerce, and the state. There were definitely concerns of commerce in story 1, with that big shift with the internet technologies occurring in the early 2000s. There were the concerns of those seeking education and providing it. I understood the concerns in 3 of the four stories, and a tension between practicality and liberalism. Now, the earliest reference to the phrase post-experience in management education was Hayworth in 1954, referring to the Henley Staff College and the new post-experience courses intended for men and women of considerable experience. And here the emphasis is on exchange of experience. And that is a thing that is still true today. Exchange of experience between the students and exchange between the student and the lecturer. I had it in 3 of the worlds, not in the failure world. And it's been part of our historical path since the very beginning of post-experience education being written about. You know, I should have been aware of it. I am now. So, methodology point 6, analyze relationships between the self and others. Well, in that exchange between myself and the others, between the students, therein lies my limitations. And I was able to categorize and very clearly point out what my limitations were. I had become unknowingly unfit for the context I was placed into. I could not extend my approaches to the subject of IT management from 5 years previously. I could not elevate the language of this to board level or detect elements beyond the unit specification or ILOs that were part of the student expectation because I didn't understand the student expectation. I was not able to scale up to the diversity of student backgrounds or concerns. I was not able to exchange as previously based on the language of experience, of subject domain or the workplace, or youthful enthusiasm and earnestness. Didn't have that anymore. I was now an older man. I was a peer and less tolerated. And I had an unawareness of the actual basis of the success I'd experienced in the past, which I put down to my voice of experience and how this affected the student's perception of my image as a teacher and kept it positive. I also had some further personal realizations that came out of the autoethnographic process. For me, I noticed that competence was not an achievement. It should be a given. It's a means of safety. I appeared to be concerned with my own safety in all of the stories, which I think says something about my Maslow pyramid, I think. I think I'm still very much around the bottom of it. In failure, there's a suggestion of incompetence, and that was evidenced by the loss of money, which was a cost to my family and to our safety. When I'm competent, existential threats are pushed back, but they're never removed. I do not believe that emancipation is possible. So I'm not a critical realist. As the structures or conditions for failure are ever present in every situation and just around the corner if I don't pay attention. But by understanding the structuring forces of my experience and with better control arising from a better understanding of my limitations as a post-experienced teacher, I can hopefully ensure that I never pass that way again. So let's, in conclusion now, just turn to Bochner's questions again, which are key for an analytical autoethnography. To what uses might the story be put? So here are my uses, here are my recommendations then to teachers of post-experienced students based on my analysis. I say there is a danger in relying on historically successful designs of pedagogy or whatever you're going to put out there. There's a danger in presuming that your identity remains unchanged in student eyes from group to group or from year to year. What do students see? You, as a person, as a material being, are a part of their experience. They're assessing your worth to exchange with from the moment they lay eyes on you. What signals are you giving? The single most important question to ask post-experienced learners before starting teaching and learning activities is, why are you here and what do you want out of this experience? I think we should work hard to know why they are there and their definition of success. And the earlier we know that, the better, because the more likely we can customize what we're doing or help them to achieve that, to feel like they're getting the thing that answers the concern that motivates them to seek higher education. I think we need to be available for the points of concern they actually have, and these will not be in module specifications or ILOs. No, we've got to talk to them to find out what those really are. And if you're in a situation where your language of experience of their workplace or domain is a little limited, find ways to say less and let them say more, because they want the exchange. Let them have it and provide you with the language that you're missing. Listen carefully and they'll tell you where to use subject language. And to employers of post-experienced students, my recommendations: sit down with new teachers and give them some kind of onboarding. Check the approach they intend to take. Talk to them about the students' main concerns and minimize the teacher's surprises. Make sure they know what they're walking into. Check the presumptions they're making about the students. Do they have that language of experience of the subject domain or the workplace? Consider how they will appear to the students and do not presume that their historical success or competency will automatically carry over to the next set of students. If autoethnography interests you, I've got a couple of references for you there, one from the analytical, one from the evocative tradition, and then your other references that have turned up in my presentation today. I'd like to thank you for listening to me go on about myself for so long. You might not believe it, but it really goes against the grain for me, all right? You know, from my background, I'm not supposed to go on about myself, and autoethnography is very much going on about ourselves, but I like to think it's for a purpose. It's to be useful. And I hope that something that I've said to you in the past 45 minutes has been useful. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you so much, Ian, for a very insightful presentation. I'm sure we found it very, very informative. I found it very informative. I think the way you went from the four interactions, the boy with all the answers, and how you moved into the listening mind and all that, it was great to see autoethnography in action clearly. So thank you so much for the insight. Thank you so much for the informative presentation as well. And I think I know a lot of us don't like talking about ourselves, but I think you did a very good job of talking about yourself. So well done, Ian, for that. So before we continue, I want us, any questions for Ian? Do you have any questions at all for Ian? Any questions? So this is the time to ask Ian questions. So any questions for Ian? What Ian spoke about autoethnography? Any questions at all? Any feedback? Anything you want to say about what Ian has said? So this is the time. So you can use the chat, or you can indicate by raising up your hand. Like I think Beverly said, okay, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I need to go for my next meeting. Okay, thanks very much, Beverly.
Thank you, Beverly.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I need to go to my next meeting, so that was very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Beverly. You were lovely. See you later.
Yeah. So any other person, questions for Ian?
Got Rachel's got a hand up.
Hi,
Okay.
hi.
Okay,
That's really interesting, Ian. Thanks very much, because I'm in the second year of doing my professional doctorate, and I'm looking at the actual identity of female academics. So that's why you can see I'm considering about autoethnography. Can I ask, though, because I've heard the same criticisms about it you mentioned, what led you to actually, how did you discover it, and then led you to actually do it despite your initial hesitance?
That's a really good question. Okay. I think I was looking for a clever word for going on about myself, I think. Maybe that's what it was. Because you know, I'm a believer in reflection, in systematic reflection, and for purpose, you know, for use. I'm a pragmatist. I always want to put things to use. And I can't remember, it's funny, although I've got a fairly autobiographical memory, I can't remember the first time I came across the word autoethnography. But I knew that what I was doing was a style of ethnography, and it was ethnography about myself. And maybe I Googled that and came across the word. But then as I read it, and I joke about discomfort with going on about myself, because it kind of runs against the class consciousness. I'm from a lower middle class background. And in our history, you don't go on about yourself, you don't put your stuff in the street, you don't moan, you don't complain, you know, and autoethnography seemed to be a lot of that stuff. But I like the analytical. So when I looked at it more seriously then and discovered the difference in traditions, you know, I kind of realized that even if it's all not all made up, but even if it has problems with the ultimate truthiness of it, it still tells us something important about the person that's telling it, why they're chosen to give this information and not that information. What are they prioritizing? What seems to be important to them? What do they reveal about their motivations or their concerns? And also, you know, in autoethnography, it's the I, isn't it? What does it reveal about me? And then the effect of having other people. Like, it's actually Lisa Anderson at BAM who pointed out to me, you seem to take responsibility for other people's feelings. Like, no one ever told me that in my life before. And I'd never even thought about it. But there was an intelligent outsider who'd read my accounts and pointed something out to me that actually turned out to be an insight that came back to me several times since. And that's another powerful thing with this then. It's that, and that's that Ellis definition where there's the author and the reader. And you've got to have both. And it's just my philosophy of identity, and I'm sure you've looked into this more deeply than I have. That identity is a two-way street. It's created by exchange, and I think through the autoethnography, you know, we discover what that exchange could be from our point of view, and then having outsiders check us or ask us questions, I think helps to validate that. Have I answered your question?
Yeah, it was just, it's that idea I'm West Coast of Scotland from working class, so believe me, navel gazing is not looked well upon, you know. But yeah, I also believe that everything is an exchange, if you like, and so the self is important in that. So it's trying to balance the two things. But the other thing is how you can actually go back and analyze yourself, almost, you know, to take that step back. And how difficult is that to do?
I like I said, I've got certain advantages in terms of my memory and my ability to not throw anything away. And these things obviously come with cost as well. Both of them come with cost. And I guess that's my advantage, I suppose. I haven't really thought about how difficult it is, because all my life I've been arranging my memories as a set of anecdotes, which the people that know me well have heard them all. So this is kind of my life. In fact, and this is going to sound crazy, when I was little, like children have an imaginary friend. Yeah, I had an imaginary audience. I used to commentate on my activities to an audience, or at the end of the day, I would review what I had done with my audience. I was like 4 or 5. Where did I get that idea from? But like I said, in a sense, I think it's nothing with autoethnography thing that I sort of fell into, and people are often surprised by what I choose to reveal, or that I can have this degree of candor. But actually, it's what I've been doing all my life. I just only in my midlife do I realize that this is something I've been doing for a long time. Maybe there's also a bit of midlife crisis going on here as well. Maybe, that I'm at that point in my life where I've got enough life to look back on, like 20 years of teaching to look back on, and to say, yeah, that wasn't good, and that was better than that. I wonder why that was. So maybe there's also like a point in your life where this stuff is more, where you can do it better, I think. Because I think if you're at the point of your life where you're still thrusting forward and not reflecting, you can't do it effectively. No, and you need to be kind of past that, I think. And I am definitely past that. Yeah, so I think that's why it was, I don't know about easy, but that's why it was possible for me. And why I was comfortable talking about some stuff that people would really not be comfortable talking about. Yeah. But on the other hand, there's plenty of stuff I'm not comfortable. I'm not telling you about my money. I'm not telling you about how much I was earning for these jobs. Because, again, where I'm from, you don't talk about money. Don't show people what you've got. So I guess that's the thing I can put down on the stuff I'm omitting from the cases, actually. That's actually a good point. So it's another good thing for doing these presentations is we talk and then we get ideas. Thank you for that one.
Thanks, Ian. Rachel.
No, thank you. That was
Yeah, it was great. I'm happy with the discussion. I can remember Ian was talking about what Lisa said then. So those things are important, how you got you to think about looking at how you relate with your experience and caring for others. And now, of course, Rachel is doing something about that. So that will also help you to improve your work further. I get more questions. I think for me, what I want to ask, I know you narrated 4 different accounts. So do you think with the way your research and teaching is evolving, do you think there's going to be another account? Again, in the sense that, you moved from the boy with all the answers, the listening man. Do you think you have a scope for another account of your own experience as you go forward?
I don't know. As I said, I think a lot of these accounts start because of a failure or a problem, or a breakdown of normal activities, or the normal and predictable chains of cause and effect. They break down in some way. And right now, stuff is pretty good. So I don't think I've got the grounds for talking about. Maybe an account of my sabbatical I'm having, perhaps, when it's finished. I don't know, because it was the BAM call for papers that sort of made me cut my life at that point. And go, okay, let's pick out these points which seem to be key in some way to my development. Like my first, and my one related to the PhD, and then my failure, and then how I try to restore myself. Those seem to have reasons for being picked. I don't yet know what's going to happen that might give me a reason for me to pick it again. And there are other stories I've not told, you know. So maybe some question will arise later that might make me think, okay, let me look to my history in the context of this question. You know, like I don't know, in terms of diversity and inclusion, you know, what have I done for my female colleagues in 20 years? You know, and then I could then do a different kind of autoethnographic inquiry about key points where I'd assisted, or perhaps not, female colleagues' careers over time. So, you know, I think maybe it's more a question not of will there be anything more to say. I guess it's more like, will there be more questions? Will I come across more questions that need this as an answer, or where this would provide a useful kind of answer? And I can't predict that, Christian. I don't know.
It's good. I think it's like you said, it's your experiences will determine that. But it's great to see out of your 4 accounts, three were successes and 1 was a failure. Most of the time, people tend to reflect more on their successes, and it's great when you know that you learned from a failure, and that failure made you more successful.
Yeah.
So that's good, because at the end, for me, it's like people shouldn't be afraid to fail, because if you fail forward, it makes you a better person. It makes you, I think, it's a stepping stone for success, as you've been able to show, and we've been able to see how how you evolved from learning from your past failures. And I think that's what we as scholars and we as researchers should encourage. That yes, it's not, that's why we always have limitations. Let us also reflect on our failures. What can we learn? It's not easy, but yeah, I did this wrong, but I wouldn't do it again, and this has made me better in every context, in academia, in business, in research, in entrepreneurship. Either way, but people, we have to learn to fail and learn from our mistakes as we go along.
And I think sometimes as well, it's actually a necessary corrective. Sometimes that's another thing I thought about as well, that maybe I'd actually come to the end of my IT teaching life, and I needed to accept that. You know, maybe I was the boy from the future in 2001, but by 2014, you know, I wasn't. And maybe I needed to know that now. And this is a very high cost way of discovering that part of my identity had changed, even without me maybe realizing it, or maybe realizing it, but not in a very conscious way. And it took a real kind of shock like that to make me realize. Yeah.
It's true. And I like, of course, the fact that you use it. And the good thing about this research approach you take, you're saying it's not just based on the fact that it's good for your research, it's something that you've been born to do. So maybe we'll argue that most of the time when we take an approach, for you to be 5 and you are already reflecting about the audience, so it means that there is something about this approach that you always loved right from the time that you were small. Always talking to the audience and all that. So I think it makes you more skilled to do autoethnography. So I don't know. Yeah. Questions for other people, from other people? Any questions for Ian, or any comments at all? We still have a couple of minutes for Ian if you want to ask any questions or comments, or if you want to engage in autoethnography. Mm-hmm. Any questions, comments? Okay. If there are no further questions or comments, I know a lot of people wanted to attend, but couldn't because of other engagements at the moment. I think there was an event in Pays Day as well happening. So I think a lot of people couldn't make it to that. But thank you so much, Ian, for sharing your thoughts with us today. It's going to be recorded. It's going to be on YouTube. So for people that want to listen to this again, you'll be able to reflect on it. It's great to see what Ian has done. And this work clearly is very, very apposite to us. And we appreciate you for coming. And Temi saying you've got a great personality.
Thank you, Temi.
Thanks for sharing your work. So I think we know that Ian, of course, we know that Ian has a fantastic personality. So thanks, Temi, for saying that as well. So thank you, Ian, for this. This is our last research seminar for the term. So I'm sure a lot of people are happy. And Ian, I don't think we could have done it better. Ian rounded it off for the term perfectly. Next year, we'll be looking at other seminars, looking at different research topics. I think the next one is going to be on crisis as well. So it's something on crisis. So we'll look at that. Hopefully the world will be better before then. But thank you so much, Ian, and thanks everybody for attending. Computer listening was very interesting. Thank you. and we would see. So for those of you, of course, everybody's on the festive mood. For those of you that celebrate Christmas, happy Christmas when it comes. And either way, try and take a break and try to recharge your batteries. We will see next year for to continue with the research forum. I think Tommy is saying what a way to end the term indeed. Very interesting presentation. So very good feedback. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, everybody. Appreciate your audience and your attention and your questions. And thank you, Christian, for giving me the opportunity.
And thank you so much, Ian, for taking your time, even doing your sabbatical to do this. We appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Take care, then. See you all later. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.